This year marks 100 years since the birth of Ritwik Ghatak, a filmmaker who still feels less like a figure from cinema history and more like an unresolved question. Ghatak wasn't simply ahead of his time, he was out of time, working at the edges of form, emotion, and politics, making films that feel like memories trying to become stories. Ify's centenary tribute with Subarnarekha feels symbolic, because if there is one filmmaker whose work refuses closure, it is Ghatak. His films are never complete. They are restless, torn, searching. They exist like fragments we keep returning to, not to admire, but to understand what they are still trying to tell us. 100 years later, the world has changed. But strangely, the wound at the center of his cinema has not. For Ghatak, Partition was not a historical backdrop. It was the defining psychic rupture of his life, the displacement of millions, the fracturing of communities, the sudden, violent rearrangement of identities. In most hands, these themes become political metaphors, but for Ghatak, they were lived experiences, carried in the body. This is why his films feel like documentaries of emotion, melodramas cut with the precision of memory. His characters don't just act, they haunt. They carry unfinished sentences, interrupted songs, gestures that feel inherited from those who didn't survive. And because the wound he was speaking from was real, his films never slip into sentimentality. They ache, but they never collapse. Among all his films, Subarnarekha holds a particular gravity. On the surface, it is a story of siblings, migration, aspiration, and loss. But underneath, it is a film about the violence of trying to rebuild a life when the ground beneath you has already shifted. The landscape in Subarnarekha is never passive. It becomes a character, harsh, beautiful, indifferent. The river is not a symbol, it is a boundary the characters cannot cross without losing something. Ghatak understood that displacement is not only about leaving a place, it is about carrying the absence of a home inside you. This is why the film feels so contemporary. Today, when the world is again witnessing mass displacement due to conflict, climate, economics, Subarnarekha speaks more urgently than many films made decades later. Ghatak wasn't predicting the future, he was simply documenting a trauma that continues to echo. One of Ghatak's most radical contributions was his sound. In his hands, sound becomes emotional architecture. Music interrupts scenes like memory breaking into consciousness. Silence becomes a political gesture. The sudden jarring edits, the mismatched sound bridges, all of it is intentional. His melodrama is not excess, it is resistance, a refusal to dilute suffering for the comfort of the viewer. Through sound and montage, Ghatak shows us how grief actually moves, abruptly, irrationally, without warning. 100 years after his birth, why does Ghatak still matter? Because his films do something that contemporary cinema, especially mainstream cinema, rarely attempts anymore. They hold complexity without resolving it. They ask us to sit with discomfort, to witness pain without demanding catharsis, to understand that history is not the past, it is an atmosphere that follows us. Ghatak never made cinema for export. He made films that belong to the soil, the fractures, and the anxieties of the subcontinent. And yet his work travels, not because of its exoticism, but because of its honesty. He reminds us that cinema can be an act of mourning, an act of rebellion, and an act of love, all at once. As we mark his centenary, it becomes clear that Ghatak's legacy is not a canon of masterpieces. It is a way of seeing, a way of listening, a way of treating art not as escapism but as confrontation, Subarnarekha, revisited in this centenary year, feels like it is asking us a quiet question. What happens to a society that forgets its wounds before they heal? Ghatak's films hold that memory for us, and perhaps that is why they remain alive, unfinished, unsettling, and necessary.